Now, let me ask our Global Financial Summit to come up, the panelists to come on up on stage. We're getting set up right now with the microphones for it. This is always one of the more popular panels at Freedom Fest. And get our moderator, Roberto, wherever you are, if you'll come on. There he is. While we're getting them up here, let me make a couple of announcements. Number one, in your registration bag, you should have had a flyer with a headline, "Don't miss our contest." Our Freedom and Gold sponsors have a wonderful contest. All you have to do is visit each of their booths and get them to stamp the space at the bottom. When you visited all six and have it stamped, fill it out with your name and address, turn it in at our registration table, and we'll have a drawing at our last panel, Saturday at noon. The winner will win tickets for 2 to Freedom Fest in 2014, all 4 nights hotel accommodations, VIP seating at our Saturday night gala, and 1 ounce of gold. So it's well worth taking the few minutes to visit those 6 exhibitors, get that filled out, and register for a wonderful, wonderful grand prize. Okay, our Global Financial Summit with our moderator, Robert Salinas Leon. He is a professor and columnist in Mexico, as well as the CEO of the Mexican Business Forum. He's continuing a legacy of fighting for liberty. We're delighted to honor his father, Roberto Salinas. At the back of your program, you'll find our tribute pages to those people we're honoring this year, including Margaret Thatcher. Roberto Salinas, his dad, is there. So please join me in welcoming as our moderator, Roberto Salinas Leon. Roberto? Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chip. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and special thanks to my dear friend Mark Skousen for the tribute to my late great father, certainly a man of character. We have men and women of character, certainly in this panel. Unfortunately, we have been asked for what seems to be like a mission impossible, which is to summarize the global economy outlook in 45 minutes with all the questions and all the answers relevant to the future of financial markets, democracy, liberty, the rule of law, and all institutions of power. But since we do the impossible here, and certainly Mark has been one to do so in the past few years with these remarkable conferences, I'm sure that this will be an extremely productive panel. We're going to handle it as a conversation between us, and so I would like to start with Steve Forbes. Steve, your leadership and your optimism on the power of productivity, of innovation, of entrepreneurship has led us to think that we should be cautious about the doomsayers in the global economy. But you've also been characterized by your realism and your warnings about the dangers of intervention, debts, overregulation, runaway spending, and the threats of the fatal conceit. So, given that, what can you tell us about the future outlook of the U.S. and the global economy? Are we truly Rome?
The answer is we're still the Roman Republic. The character has not been totally corrupted. Ideas have undermined us since the 1930s, particularly with the advent of the Great Depression. But ideas, and I think this is an example of it, this gathering can be turned around. Bad ideas can be overcome. Looking at the global economy, 2 big things are holding the global economy back. One is to have a successful global economy, you need a global currency. Global currencies are not invented by governments and central banks. They arise from the marketplace, whether it's bills of exchange from Italian banks, Spanish silver, Dutch coins and financial instruments, the British pound, the US dollar. Markets create that. And when you have a currency that is uncertain in value, whose integrity has been undermined, you have a troubled global economy. It's not just economic, it also is corrosive in terms of social trust. So getting a stable dollar, getting a gold-based dollar, that's what the debate should be, and I'm convinced in the next 4 years it's going to happen. It sounds outlandish today, but outlandish things have happened before, both positive and negative. If we push something, get a debate going, I think most people get it right away. A weak dollar is not a good thing. You don't have to be an economist to understand that. In fact, it helps not to be an economist to understand that. And the other big thing holding back the global economy is that for the first time since the early 1930s, Roberto, the world is engaging in massive tax increases. In the 70s, a lot of tax increases came about because inflation kicked people into higher tax brackets. This is the first time since the early 1930s, in the face of uncertain economic conditions, countries are raising taxes. And we saw what happened in the early 30s when that happened, but you look at Southern Europe today, Spain raised their top rate to 52. They're all raising their VATs. Greece is increasing every tax ever conceived of. France is still trying to get a 66 or 75% income and capital gains levy. They wonder why they're faltering. Japan's raising their top rate to 55, doubling their national sales tax. Their debt is now 250% of GDP, and they still don't get it. We raised taxes somewhat in January, but by international standards, we were pretty tame. And at least we got some other things off the table in terms of uncertainty. So the bottom line is, until we get those two big things right, we're going to have a troubled global economy. We're going to be prey to crises. One of the good things is, and I think Dinesh touched on it yesterday, is American exceptionalism. When this country gets it right, the rest of the world gets it right. When we falter, the rest of the world falters. That's just so far a fact of life. And so I think in the next few years, we are going to start to get these things right. And just as in the early 80s, when Ronald Reagan cut tax rates, within a few years, 50 countries around the world made significant tax rate cuts. I think we're going to see a positive environment coming up, and that's what's going to turn it around. If we don't make those changes, then the doomsayers will be right. We will be in bigger and bigger trouble. But I think there's still that regenerative process in this country. But the two immediate things are sound currency and taxes. Get those right, then other reforms are possible and productive.
Thank you, Steve. Barbara, there seemed to be an out-of-the-box idea in Europe, thinking out of the box, especially with the leadership of Bob Mundell a few years ago, about using the euro as a unit of account that had the characteristics that Steve was talking about right now. And yet, it seems to have produced, fiscally speaking, the exact opposite of what we wanted. Instead of a straitjacket, we have a free-for-all, and it seems like every quarter or so, there's a new country that seems to be in problems, whether it's Greece or Spain, now more recently Portugal, and certainly tax rates of 66% or 75%, the difference there in terms of human action and how politicians simply do not realize that people respond to incentives, and getting taxed on your wealth at 75% is certainly going to produce incentives, whether you're left or right or up or down. I mean, was the euro a good idea, or are we destined to see a collapse of the euro in the near term?
Well, theoretically, if the euro had been a sound money, it would probably have been a good idea for Europe, but it is not. It's not sound money. It's not backed up. What the ECB does right now is, against all good rules of monetary policy. They are printing money. They do exactly the same stupidities as has happened in the United States. And after all, the only good thing about the euro is that the problems that we have hidden in Europe far too long, and the imbalances that we have had are now emerging. And we have not done structural reforms. At least those countries that you were talking about, especially the southern countries, but also Central European countries, they didn't do their homework. And this is now finally, since we are on the same currency and we cannot inflate and deflate the problems away, this is seen. And talking about also taxes, there were only 6 countries in the past year in Europe that have cut their taxes. All the rest, and we now have a new member state, Croatia, which is in big problems. All the rest of the 27 have risen their taxes. A couple of them have stayed stable. But what we see in Europe is that when the euro was was put into practice, we started to violate. We really violated all the rules and regulations that were imposed on that. And when we bailed out Greece for the first time, we literally violated our own contracts, whether it was the Lisbon Treaty or the Maastricht criteria. We violated the paragraphs 124 and 123, and without consequences. And this is the troubling thing, what we see in Europe right now. Our politicians, and by that it is Merkel, there is no alternative, because she tied the euro to the European Union, which is completely two different things. Europe, the nation states, are one thing, and a currency is something different. But they made this political project, they created this political project in order to stay in power. And what they are is they are greedy for power. And in order to stay in power, they raise their taxes, they bribe the taxpayers, their citizens, with promises. So to make the long story short, no, the euro definitely will not remain the way we see it right now, and we will have to make our homework, which means structural reforms, and this cannot be done with such strong imbalances that we see. Just to give you two more examples, the German worker stays in work until at least 67 years. The French guy goes to pension with approximately between 50 and 55. The German productivity is 4 times as high as the Spanish one. The labor market is tight in Spain. In France, their labor laws are just incredible, old-fashioned. Germany, and actually a socialist chancellor, opened these labor markets, and thanks to the Schröder reforms, the Strong Hartz IV reforms 12 years ago, Germany is now able to bail out the rest of Europe. But the question is, for how long will it do so, and how long can it remain being in that position when everybody is going down the drain?
One of the lessons there is that values like adaptability, productivity, innovation, and certainly flexibility have become key to a new economic vocabulary or our understanding. Richard, can you tell us, are there any examples that you see worldwide that have been able to adopt these values? And especially as far as your interpretation, Steve was saying, of money as a human institution grounded in human action. Are there any precedents or good examples that we could follow nowadays?
Well, the best example is Chile. And Chile has a government spending ratio of about 20%, a very low debt to GDP. They put in the privatized Social Security system 33 years ago. Our friend Jose Pinera designed that. They've got reasonable regulations for the most part. They're now the 10th most free country in the world. And of course, Switzerland, which is always near the top, the Swiss have consistently managed a good economic system. Our biggest problem, and I did an analogy in an article I wrote this week, is the world economy is now in a stall. As you know, with aircraft, if you're moving too slowly, if you have too much weight, if you have the wrong angle of attack, an aircraft goes into stall. What has happened with the world economy is we've added too much weight in terms of government spending and regulation and taxation. Much of the tax rates are above the optimal point in the Laffer curve. And we've got this enormous debt problem. If you take a look now at all the major economies in the world, you will find, with a handful of exceptions, that the economic growth rates are less than their deficits. That means their debt-GDP ratio is increasing. And as has already been pointed out, Japan is way over 200%. Many of the European countries are in deep trouble. The French claim it's 90%. They're really more like 150%. But as long as your growth rate is less than your deficit, you're getting in deeper and deeper trouble each month. Now, what is going to turn this around? Steve talked about money. That's one of the key things. Well, there has to be a radical reduction in government spending, and particularly transfer payments. We look at Europe and Japan, and you've got the demographic problem of their below replacement rate in terms of population. Very few new babies are coming up. Japan last year was the first country in the world to sell more adult diapers than baby diapers. You know your economy is in deep trouble when
There's
that
an
occurs.
indicator for you, huh?
For many years, like Steve, I'd always been an optimist. But it's very hard now to take a look at the world economic leadership and be optimistic. And I was an optimist about the U.S. up until the point that Steve did not get elected president. And so I think to say, are we going to have growth or renewal growth? Which country is really going to reduce government spending, or how many countries are going to do that? Reduce regulations. We have more than 1 million regulations now in the U.S. All of you have committed a number of felonies this morning, but you don't even know it yet. But when you're targeted, you will learn about it.
Well, we only have 14 minutes left, and I'm sure that Mark will assume his Caligula or dictatorial role if we overstep our times. But let me mention the following. There are examples beyond Chile, at least from a fiscal point of view, in Latin America, curiously enough. In my own country, in Mexico, our former finance minister and Chicago economist turned Hayekian, Francisco Gil Diaz, recently said that Latin America proves that we're living in a world upside down, because those countries like Peru or Mexico or Chile that were examples of runaway inflation and very high spending and over-leveraging, today are setting the example in terms of so-called austerity measures and tax reform. And places like Peru and Mexico have become important attractive investment regimes, despite the problems that you have with organized crime and everything that you hear in the everyday media today. Nevertheless, even places like Chile and certainly other basket cases like Venezuela and Argentina have been dependent on the commodity boom that we have experienced in recent years. And a lot of people, especially at a popular level, have taken this to be an indication that the Kirchner government in Argentina or the miracle of Brazil as being part of the BRICS, or certainly Venezuela and the caudillo messianic populism over there was actually a good thing for those countries. So Jim, you have informed a great deal of our views on commodities. What is the future of commodities, and does this bode ill for the trust fund child effect of places like Argentina or Brazil or certainly Venezuela?
Well, I'm going to start somewhere else first, because the name of this panel is the State of the World Economy, I think. And I will tell you all that this is the first time in recorded history that nearly every major bank, every major country in the world is printing huge amounts of money in an attempt to debase their own currency. We have, the Japanese said in November, we will print unlimited, that's their name, unlimited amounts of money. So then Mr. Bernanke in Washington said, well, wait a minute, guys, we can do that too. And he jacked up what he was going to print. And then the English said, well, wait, we got a new central bank head, and he knows how to print money. So they were off to the races, and then the Europeans jumped in and said, oh, well, don't worry, we can do that too. We will print a lot of money if we have to in order to keep interest rates at an artificial low level. Now, we know historically what happens when one country prints too much money and debases its currency, but this is the first time in recorded history where everybody is doing it at the same time. So the world right now is floating on this huge artificial flood of money, of paper money that's floating around. And I want you all to know it's wonderful for the people who are getting it. And if you're getting some of that money, I'm sure you're delighted and you're very pleased. All your friends are too. But unfortunately, this is going to end, and when it ends, it's going to end badly. One of two things has to happen. Either the governments themselves have to come to the conclusion that this has got to stop, and they will stop it, or the public, us, we're just going to finally say, listen, we're not going to take this garbage money anymore, and they're going to force, the market's going to force it to stop. So either way, when this huge flood of liquidity ends, it's going to be a mess for everybody in the world, not just everybody in this room. We're going to have serious currency turmoil. We're already having currency turmoil, but just wait until things really get bad. We're going to have interest rate turmoil. We're going to have much more inflation. The world is going to be in a mess. I'm not terribly happy about what's going to be happening later this year or next year or the year after that, because this madness has to end. Now, when it ends, to your question, Roberto, when it ends, historically, the way you protect yourself is to own real assets, because when currencies are being debased and destroyed and inflation is raging, you try to own something that will come through whatever's happening with some kind of value. Now, whether that's rice or sugar or silver, whatever it happens to be, that's the way you should protect yourself. And the countries you mentioned, most of them are natural resource-based economies. Unfortunately, Brazil is being run by, a woman who doesn't have a clue about economics. I'm not sure she has a clue about much of anything. But so it's not just the fact that you have natural resources, you've got to have good management. The Congo has staggering amounts of natural resources, but I don't have any money invested in the Congo because it's not a terribly well-run country.
Barbara, you had a question, and I also wanted to ask all of you concerning this massive printing of money. Have the global markets become addicted to the morphine of stimulus spending, and is there any way of ridding them of this addiction without a crash landing? Barbara, please.
Well, we just came home from our free market roadshow, which toured 26 capitals in 6 weeks, and in Europe and the Caucasus. And there we saw with the next generation that they do understand that these policies, meaning the buying time by politicians, needs to end. They understand the real virtues that Larry pointed out, and those positive rights that they were educated in the good old welfare state do not work anymore. So in addition to you, Jim, I would also say what the next generation needs in real assets is also the value and the education that they take, that they are self-responsible and that they need to fix their own problems and that they cannot rely on governments and that they need to do it, to take it in their own hands.
Thank you, Steve.
And I think a good example of that is looking at Europe. There are several states there that do get it. Central and Eastern Europe, the Baltic states took real hits in the initial part of the financial crisis. They're showing growth. Even countries like Bulgaria, for all the problems they have, 10% flat tax, that goes a long ways. And the thing about the idea that printing money means prosperity in the stock market, let's get real. The stock market today in real terms is no higher than it was in the late 1990s. And we've had a lot happen since the late 1990s. We saw the same phenomenon in the 70s. This is bad stuff. And the fact that you would have to consider commodities. When you invest in that, that means you're not investing in the future. You're investing to protect what you have and maybe make some money because everything else is collapsing. And that's one of the points we have to get about in inflation. I was on a show the other day, and I'm going to do this again, and you should too. Whenever a central banker talks about the need for 2 or 2.5% inflation, or whatever number they want to pick, ask them, who gave you the authority to tax an American family making $40,000, the equivalent of $1,000? That's 2.5%. And so when they talk, and the guy was flummoxed. He said, well, we haven't achieved 2.5% inflation. I said, answer the question. Who gave you the authority to deprive $1,000 of purchasing power from an American family? Who gave you that taxing authority? And start hitting these people.
Paul Krugman gave him that authority.
Yeah. I want to add on to Steve's comment there. What we've had with the Fed printing all this money, which we know they can't pay back, that is a liability on the American taxpayers. The Constitution is clear that only the Congress has the right to spend money. But now we have the Fed spending incredible quantities of money that you all are ultimately going to be responsible for totally unconstitutionally.
Jim.
Yeah, I
Yep.
just would like to add, I'm a severe critic of American Central Bank. As some of you know, Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Bernanke are hopeless and have given us many, many problems. And they, not only are they spending money, they're jacking up huge amounts of debt. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet has gone from $800 billion of government bonds to over $4 trillion of junk. A lot of it's junk. But we're all going to pay for it. I assure you, we're all going to pay for it. But the good news is that America's had 3 central banks. The first 2 disappeared. This one's going to disappear too because we have such idiots running the central banks that with their policies they're going to destroy themselves. Now, a world without central banks has problems, but I assure you a world, and the world's got along many times without central banks, a world without these central banks will be much, much better no matter how bad the problems are.
Well, and one of the things to keep in mind when you hear this talk about a lack of inflation, first of all, just remember the housing bubble and that debacle never would have happened if we had a stable dollar, so we've already had adverse effects. But one of the things the Fed has done now with its crazy QEs, and by the way, I was in England several months ago, and somebody reminded QE in Britain stands for Queen Elizabeth, and this person suggested instead of calling it QE, call it Titanic. Titanic 1, Titanic 2, Titanic 3. Much more descriptive. But what the Fed has done, and one reason why we haven't had a total debacle yet with this balance sheet, is they put the money out and then take it back in. In the private sector, if you borrow short and lend long, you get in trouble. The Fed doesn't have that problem yet. But what they've done in the meantime is totally distorted the credit markets. They've allocated credit to big companies, to mortgage securities, and to big government, and that's really starved credit for smaller businesses. That's one reason why we've had punk job creation until recently. The Fed has totally distorted the market. And just remember, any time a central bank controls interest rates, that's like rent control. And you know what that does to the housing market? It's done the same thing to the credit markets, totally distorted them. And so big gets the money, and small has to struggle. That's why we're struggling.
There are many economists that don't seem to have realized, at least according to some voices of cautious optimism, that there's a tremendous revolution going on in energy. And in certainly the latest edition of Forbes, it is said that, for instance, the shale gas revolution in the United States and in some places in Latin America and elsewhere, well, that's a good example of a natural resource where you need investment, productivity, you need the right institutions, and thankfully governments don't seem to realize that yet that this is an area that could be overregulated, but it does lend hope, at least in the opinion of some, that this could be the next great wave of sustainable growth for the U.S. and for the world. Barbara, I know you had a comment, but we have 2 minutes left, and Mark is really strict about this.
I just only had a comment that, you know, it's not that black and white in Europe. There are countries who, like Spain, has tremendous problems on their labor market with a youth unemployment rate over 50%. However, they refrain from taking money from Brussels because they do not want to get under control of these guys there. They understand that they need to fix their problems themselves, and this is a very good example, whereas France is doomed, definitely.
Let me
I
add
just
one.
don't know
okay.
yet.
Let me add one thing about the shale. In recent weeks, the British have now found incredible shale gas reserves in Britain. And I saw a poll just this morning that 75% of the British people now say, enough of the green stuff, we want to go to the shale gas. So maybe Steve is not totally unrealistic. There may be some hope out there after all.
Anyone else? Jim?
By the way, on that, one advantage we have in terms of shale is we're about the only country in the world that allows you to own minerals below ground. Most other countries don't allow you to do that, which is why we have more exploration here.
That's precisely it. I mean, it's the institutions. Argentina's full of shale gas. Vaca Muerta is one of the richest fields of shale gas in the world. Who's going to invest in Argentina now? They're pricing it at $5 billion, and there's no company in their right minds that are going to pull in that kind of money in order to be able to develop those fields. Speaking of which, There are several voices today that are suggesting the end of power as we know it. And Larry Reed, great reminder that shackled and dispersed power is better than centralized power. Is this really a trend? This would be the final question for the panel. Is this really a trend, and does it lend any sense of optimistic hope for free markets and civil society? By the way, I'm a philosopher, not an economist. That's why I posed that question.
Well, just to start it, when you have still freedom remaining, it's amazing what free people can do to upend the destructive policies of politicians. And just one example among zillions. I'm old enough to remember in the early 70s when the government regulated interest rates, not just at the Fed, but for what you could receive in your CDs. Then along come money market funds, an invention of technology, and boom, Reg Q and those things just went right out the window. And in terms of fracking, that was one entrepreneur, George Mitchell in Texas, who against all the odds really pushed what we now call fracking. So yes, well, all these conferences politicians have, I love them. I just wish they'd continue talking and let the entrepreneurs do the doing.
Jim, I know that Richard and Barbara want to get in on this, and we were given a little more time, thankfully. But Jim, I wanted your opinion to press on the commodities issue. Would shale gas be a new commodity, or is a new commodity boom ahead of us?
Well, I hate to rain on your parade, but the shale gas boom is not turning out to be as much fun as the press seems to think it is. The number of drilling rigs for shale gas has gone down by 75% in the last 18 months. The orders for pumps are down 50% because what happens is these wells come on stream and it's a lot of fun, and people have drilling commitments to keep their acreage, so they run out and drill a lot, and we have a lot of gas has come on stream, but now people are realizing, oh my gosh, these wells disappear pretty quickly. The SEC is requiring some of the shale gas companies to drop their reserve estimates very dramatically here in the last few months. So I know the press loves it, and I know it's supposed to save the world, and it might. We may be able to overcome the problems of shale gas and shale oil, by the way. They're the same problems, it turns out, just a little bit less developed. And that may end the current bull market in commodities, but if so, it's a long, long way away. But in the meantime, these problems are not as miraculous as some of the press says. But I want to go, since we're talking about the world, we haven't mentioned Asia yet. We've mentioned South America and Europe. But I would urge you all to at least be aware that in Asia, the situation is a bit different. The largest creditor nations in the world now are China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. The assets are in Asia. The assets are going up. America is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, and the debts are going higher at a rapid rate. You know about the debts in Europe. So the world is changing. In the 1920s and 30s, the center of the world moved from the UK to the US, exacerbated by a financial crisis and mistakes made by politicians. Well, the same thing is happening now. The world is moving from the U.S. to Asia, exacerbated by a financial crisis and mistakes made by politicians. I would suggest that maybe the best advice I can give you is to, short of owning real assets, is to teach your children and grandchildren Chinese.
Okay, Richard and Barbara want to
And
get
by the
in
way,
on this.
my children speak Chinese.
Coming to your question, whether this is the end of the final downturn, I think, yes, we are Rome regarding Europe. We are just doing it much faster than it took 2,000 years ago. They took some time to decline. We are doing it very fast. However, the good news is, if we look what has happened in Great Britain under Thatcher's leadership, back then Great Britain was the sick man of Europe, and she really fixed the problem with the right policies. So yes, it can be done. However, the obstacle is our political parties and our political or lack of political leadership. And the good news here is that, you know, as an Austrian economist, I believe in innovation and in new processes. So I think that what we see with the decline of the political parties in the respective countries, whether it's especially the southern countries and the new member states, that we will get new institutions. And when those new institutions fix the property rights issues, which is a precondition for capitalism, Europe will be able to sustain or to reinvent itself.
Richard, and if you could also mention something about your views concerning the future of the Middle East, especially in the context of the shale gas issue.
I look at the Middle East as in terminal decline, and I could speak on that for a half hour, but I won't, so we'll just go on to the other things. The good news, since we're right at the end, is The Economist magazine, a couple weeks ago, reported on a survey in the UK showing that British young people are increasingly classical liberals, libertarians in American parlance. They've lost faith in any of the political parties. We're also finding that, of course, here in the U.S. A lot of people haven't gravitated to the Republican Party because the Republican Party hasn't been libertarian enough, but people are getting totally fed up, and I think the debacle of Obamacare is reinforcing the notion that government can't do anything. And finally, for those of you who want to be optimistic, read George Gilder's new book. I've read it over the last few days. I admit I'm biased. I've known George I realized the other day, for 44 years since I was in graduate school. And George has been one of the most innovative and creative and provocative people on our planet over the last half century. He's done marvelous work. And it's an excellent book, but there are several errors in it. And I want you to go through, read it carefully, and see if you can detect the errors. I'll give you one right off. He doesn't understand correctly what Hayek meant by the spontaneous order. I'll take that up with George later on. But it's an excellent book. You'll leave thinking there is hope, technology in the information age.
Despite the increase of overregulation and despite the tax philosophy today, as Larry Reed reminded us, it's not just a socialist paradigm. It seems to be a global paradigm. Keep quiet and pay your taxes. And despite all these onerous obstacles, still the economy, not just the U.S. economy, but the economies worldwide seem to find some sort of way. Is this a tribute to the productivity of human action, the innovations, and the adaptability to different circumstances? And again, how does this affect the outlook for our future?
What we have is a huge rise of black and gray markets. And people find their way around the endless government regulations, the counterproductive taxes. But this is not a good way. You want a society where there are few laws, low taxes, and the rule of law. We're moving away from that. People will find ways to survive. I was involved in a transition in Eastern Europe, and it always amazed me, under those horrible circumstances, how most people actually found ways to, keep bread on the table and keep going with the total collapses of the government.
But Roberto, you say we've had this this boom, and we have, but if you look at the amount of debt that has come into the world in the last 50 years and the amount of money that's been printed, sure, you give me $1 trillion and I'll show you a very good time, especially if I don't have to pay it back. But unfortunately, we're going to have to pay it back someday, and this madness of debt and money printing cannot last. Barbara?
Roberto, to your question regarding Europe at least, we still have the entrepreneurs there. They are the backbone, and those are the guys who pay the taxes, whether it's in northern Italy, the small and medium-sized enterprises, or it's all over Germany. And this is why I'm so negative about France, because they do not exist there anymore, thanks to the unions and thanks to the big government-owned enterprises and to the labor laws, and 2/3 of the working population being in public office. I mean, this is just unbelievable. 2/3 of the labor force is hired by government in France. Mm-hmm. This can't be productive.
Well, I think Jim and others in this panel are absolutely right about eventually those debts have to come due, and if it's through the inflation process or exchange rate devaluations or these currency wars or some such measure, the debts have to be recognized. And that's not just the public debts, but also those alleged contingent liabilities, which is a fancy name for hidden debt, basically. But on the other hand, I wonder if despite these crushing debts, somebody like Neil Ferguson might be right in saying that this is heading us straight into the collapse of a la Rome scenario. So, Steve, could you give us a few insights?
Well, one of the things to keep in mind is the whole concept of a balance sheet, assets, liabilities. We know it's happened to the liability side. What we have to do is create an environment such as sound money, sensible taxation, where you grow the assets side. That's how we got out of trouble in the 1980s, which in some senses after the 70s was as bad or worse than what we have today. Different, but pretty bad. And in the 1980s, even though the national debt went up $1.7 trillion, most of it because of defense spending, a good investment because we did win the Cold War, but because of the reforms we did in the 80s, the net wealth of the nation went up $17 trillion. And so today, one of the reasons why we do these reforms is not just so government might get more revenue and get its house in order, or less revenue so it does less, is that we grow the asset side. Liabilities become much more copable when you have growing assets. And that's what we've got to do again. And if you just start to change, for example, the whole delivery of health care, the massive liabilities on Medicare and Medicaid come crashing down because they're predicated on 75-year estimates. You start to get a little real free market productivity, and those things come down dramatically. And one of the things that has to be done in 2016 is to get candidates to forcefully advocate personal accounts for Social Security. I don't care what the numbers show. People like me are going to go to our ultimate reward, and those liabilities will go with them. But if we have a system where the bulk of those payroll taxes go into your own personal account, you own them with sensible rules and diversification, you turn a liability to an asset, and young people will immediately realize this is coming from their labor. They created those assets, not politicians. So the sooner we get personal accounts for younger people, we're going to go a long ways to redeeming our character.
And moreover, Jose Piñera, our friend from Chile, who was instrumental and still is instrumental in spreading the word of private accounts, he says, besides, it's your right. It's your retirement. It's not the government's retirement, it's somebody else's retirement. It's your retirement. So it's also a moral issue of a property right that you're going to realize when you turn 65 or 70 or when the retirement age is. The capital markets that it creates. Chile is always one of the greatest examples, but Mexico too has become a very important example. In 1996, we adopted a system of private accounts, and today we have this financial market of real assets that are able to finance real projects. One of the key questions for the future is going to be how we instrument these structural reforms. I think one of the great areas to think about, and I'm inviting myself to next year's panel as a moderator, one of the great areas to think about is precisely how do we position the opportunities for these reforms? And secondly, is how do we communicate them? I think you've had a great example of how to communicate them here with one woman and three men of great character. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.